Hi, welcome back. I am really excited about today's episode. It seems like each week, each month, throughout the last half of this year, we hear one problem after another. It's different aspects of the pandemic, new news, oftentimes not good news, and lots of events that have occurred that are highly problematic. And then we have companies and jobs that are facing a lot of disruption, primarily because they can't pivot quickly enough to this new dynamic, this new scenario that we're in. So there are, numerous problems or challenges that many of us have right now. Homeschooling kids, the list goes on and on. We have fires out here in the Bay Area, which means there are a lot of knock-on effects to basic things like electricity. So I am excited today that we're going to be talking about really how to get to better solutions to a wide variety of problems. And, when I was in law school, one of the things that they teach you is not just the laws, which, you can look up online or in books, but how to think. So they say, one of the reasons people go to law school is to teach you how to think. One of the ways that you learn how to think is really how to look at a scenario from lots of different viewpoints. And I think that's pretty critical to problem solving. So a lot of times we go straight to the solution because we just want to solve the problem. And sometimes we don't dive in deep enough into what the problem actually is. And so we solve maybe symptoms of a problem rather than a more systemic approach to problem solving by diving deeper into those problems. So today, we have the great fortune of speaking to Thomas Weddell, and he is a longtime friend of mine and somebody that I really respect and admire. And he has written a book called What's Your Problem? Right here. I love this book. And I love it because it really dives into how we can reframe problems to come up with better solutions. So today, Thomas is really going to help share a little more detail around the approach that he goes into in terms of the blueprint of the book and problem solving and problem reframing. And we'll have just a kind of casual conversation around how we can get better at problem solving. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Thomas.
Hello, Angel. Great to be on the show.
Yeah, thank you. And from Denmark, no less.
From sitting in a hotel lobby in Denmark. I'm back here for a month, kind of, reconnecting with family and friends after having ridden out most of the initial part of COVID in New York.
Well, the hotel does not look very busy, so.
No, they told me. Yeah, they told me they had during the week they had something like 15% occupancy rate. So wow. They were very happy when I came and said, "Hey, can I book a room for a month?" So
I bet. Well, hopefully things will start picking up again because I'd like to make it back to Denmark. Cool. So, Thomas, I think it would be great for you to just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and your story and kind of, building up to your decision and inspiration behind writing the book.
Yeah, I think the brief story is I'm an author with Harvard Business Review, and I work with a lot of different companies all over the world, helping them get better at both innovation and problem solving. And 7 years ago, I wrote my first book with them, this thing here, Innovation as Usual. And that was really all just about, how do you manage to solve this challenge of innovation when you work in a really busy, maybe a big company with lots of rules and stuff. You're not in Silicon Valley in a garage. You're kind of sitting and having to figure it out as part of a big organization. It was kind of through that work that I started noticing something weird. And the weird thing was around problem solving, because when you look at problem solving is everything, right? Of course, like problem solving is deeply embedded in innovation, but also just in our daily operations. And what I noticed was this thing that people are actually fairly good problem solvers, but there's a part of this which they're bad at, and that's what's like in academia it's called problem finding, the art of figuring out what problem to solve, and if we are solving the right problem when we're facing something specific. That's really that was a bit puzzling, because it's actually something we know a lot about from academia. We've been researching this topic for over 50 years. But I just noticed working with all these companies and some startups and stuff that we sucked at it, to be honest. And so the book really came from a method I developed to make people better at it, to go in and teach this one very specific skill about, it's like the front end of problem solving, which is that whole task of going in and saying, are we solving the right problem? And once I developed that, and once I figured out it worked, then I spoke to Harvard again and about turning that into a book. And they really liked the idea, and that was where, I think you showed it before, but that's how this monster was eventually born. I had a lot of fun kind of doing it with, doing a little bit of different, more practical format, since it was very much like a method book I wanted to share with. So I think that's really the story. I just realized, I did a little bit of data sampling on it, and I found out, I surveyed more than 100 companies about it, and they said 85% of them said, this is something we're bad at, that we tend to lose a lot of money on. And interestingly enough, even the people, like individuals who were like reasonably good at it, they didn't necessarily know why. Like they didn't actually knew what they're doing. It's kind of like tacit knowledge. And if you're hoping to learn it, like your best chance would be to sit next to somebody who knew how to do it and kind of absorb it by osmosis. So the whole concept was to go in and really just develop a fairly simple method for how to get better at it.
So I think, most people, when they think about problems, they think about how to avoid them as opposed to how to look for them. And although I would say that's the opposite probably of most entrepreneurs or innovators, right? I think we're constantly looking for problems to solve, right?
Exactly. I mean, entrepreneurs in particular are professional problem finders.
Yes.
We go out and we try to look for things that, overlooked needs or problems that haven't been fixed, and then we invent, whatever that solution is.
Yes. And I think when we're looking at different problems to solve, a lot of times, we can come up with lists and lists and lists of problems, whether it's basic things in terms of our daily lives or more kind of macro things. But I think, also what I know I found is in maybe more so in the technology sector, a lot of times we'll find cool technologies, and then we kind of look for problems to be able to apply that technology to, rather than looking at what's the problem for us to develop a technology around. And what's your experience in that, in terms of either the companies that you've worked with or as you were writing the book, where people are finding solutions, then looking for problems?
It's so typical. It's called like a solution in search of a problem.
Yeah.
And one place I saw this was in Cisco, where I worked with a specific team in there who had been developing, like, they tried to make their innovation processes better, because they realized what was happening was they were running this kind of lean startup type workshop. And people from the business were joining with some kind of thing. And what they realized was people were showing up with a technical solution they had fallen in love with.
Yes.
And then when they were asked about, wait, what problem does this actually solve? They would kind of retroactively engineer the problem to fit the solution they loved.
Yes.
And the leader of the initiative, a guy called Oseas Ramirez-Assad, he actually realized they needed to stop that process. They needed to go back to basics, like say, wait a second, before we charge ahead into this thing you want to do, we need to make sure that the problem we're talking about is actually real. And so one of the super simple things they did was to demand from the teams that they placed a phone call to some of the clients and just asked, like, they were not allowed to talk about their solution. They literally could not mention it. The only thing they were allowed to say was, so we think you might have this problem in your oil refineries or whatever it is. And then just listen. Like, and in some cases, the client said, yeah, we actually have that. Great news. In other cases, clients said, we don't have that problem, or we are really not interested in a solution to it because we're doing that internally, or, no, that's not an important problem for us at all. And then, just instantly, Cisco got better at figuring out what to stop, like what technical projects not to solve, because the alternative is build something for 3 years and then realize clients don't want it, which has happened, not just in Cisco, but elsewhere as well. So yeah. Very, very typical thing. I guess, you have some experience as well, not just some, but a lot of experience with this, both in corporates and the startups and so on. Have you seen it, and what have you seen around it?
Yeah, I've had a lot of similar experiences, and I think both in startups and in large corporates, where definitely people will fall in love with ideas or solutions or even problems, and once they fall in love, it's very hard to get them to look at things with a new set of eyes or from a different perspective. Because momentum starts to build, right? Once you're really in love, it's the person or the project can do no wrong, at least for a certain period of time.
Absolutely. And there's this, I spoke to a guy called Luke Mansfield, who at the time was he was head of innovation for Pepsi in their beverages group. And his point was basically like the cost of not discovering you're solving the wrong problem it basically increases by a factor of 10 for every step. Like, in the beginning, solving the wrong problem, no problem. You can course correct quickly.
Yeah.
After the CEO has signed off on it, that's an expensive problem to have to redirect from. Oops, that was the wrong tree we are barking up. Sorry, that can get expensive. So the earlier in the process you get good at going in and doing this, the more time, money, energy you save.
For sure. I know when I was heading up smart mobility innovation over at Castrol and BP, we had our problem was looking at, if there's a world that's moving to electric possibly more rapidly than was anticipated, that's potentially a fantastic, thing for the environment, et cetera. And from a BP or Castrol standpoint, it means there's less demand for a lot of their kind of core products and services. So they really wanted to look at what are all of the new ways that they can really make up for those revenue losses by looking at how they can participate in the electrification of vehicles and transportation and even logistics, and what are ways for them to kind of future-proof the organization, the company. And so they would look at deep domain expertise. They would look at resources. They would look at what kind of skill sets they had. Identifying one particular area or even a set of areas to start from was pretty challenging. They had a whole host of other issues as well, from oil spills and the rest of it. But really looking at, okay, how do we figure out where we have a unique advantage or an unfair advantage to compete? Look at narrowing down those wide set of problems or opportunities into ones that are potentially worth exploring further, because even the exploration phase can be costly, right? You've got to dedicate people and time, and you've got to have customers and other people throughout the market who you can, consult with and go through a kind of exploratory test phase. So I think, in the book, how do you address when people are really looking at where are the best problem areas. So they're not quite yet at that stage of saying, okay, this is a problem, and then kind of whittling down from there. But when they're trying to narrow down which set of problems, how have you found, at least in your work or within the book, that people can kind of go about that? Methodologies, process, approaches, thinking, mindset?
I'd say one of the big pitfalls to avoid is that of anchoring it too much in your internal problems. Like, companies come to and say, our problem is we need to generate more growth or revenue. Great. I see why that's your problem, but nobody else cares about that.
Yeah.
And if you start, trying to pick apart a problem like we need to grow more, is kind of like, good luck with that. You're not going to find anything interesting in that way. The way, like, the important rule, I think, is that you have to anchor it in an external viewpoint. Like, who are the stakeholders you're looking at here? Who might be stakeholders we're not serving right now, but that could be relevant in our space? And then try to understand what core problems they're facing that we have an advantage in kind of helping them solve. You need both. It's not only looking at, because you need some kind of theory about where you go look in the first place. So it's not wrong to think about, well, what are our capabilities? What arenas do we play in? You just can't anchor it too much in that. That has to a little bit be in the background as you start searching.
Yeah, absolutely. I know through some of our work at Prehype and co-created by Prehype, our venture studio, when we're talking to different clients, that's definitely a big component of it. For example, with the Diageo or somebody like that, they're looking at, okay, how do we increase, profit, sales, revenue? Yeah. And, we need to look at, okay, well, what's happening in the market, what's happening with customers, and, customers in lots of different segments and profiles, and, what are they, what are their problems, or what's missing, what desires, joy, experiences, do they want to have? And then kind of step back to look at, okay, are there any opportunities to create new products, new services, new categories? Yeah. And I think one of the other challenges is that when it comes to innovation or expansion into, new areas, a lot of companies, I think, will find it hard to step outside of what they consider to be their core competencies, right? So if they're a hardware company, getting them to think about new software as a service, subscription models, which are tied typically into, software, not always. They could be other, physical products like we have, with Bark and other companies. But it's really hard for them to start thinking in those new areas of new business models, because it requires different skill sets, different type of talent. But a lot of times they could really leverage an existing customer base with these new products and services. Yeah.
And I think that's a couple of thoughts on that. I think one is, of course, to draw on outsiders, because that's where you need fresh perspectives. People aren't too anchored in the current business model. I think that's one of the merits of the Prehypes and co-creators of this world, that they are good at doing that. I would say as well, though, that there can be a trap in thinking we need to completely reinvent everything, redefine our business. Yeah, sounds very appealing. And we read some of those stories once in a while. Having said that, most of the stories, success stories I've seen over 15 years now, there's so much potential in smaller stories. And with smaller, I mean, they may not end up on the cover of Time magazine or whatever, but they can really make a difference when you don't necessarily say, we have to break down our entire industry business model. Where you can go in and just say, okay, what can we do with our current setup? What's the adjacent possible? Is an expression you hear thrown around. Instead of necessarily thinking or starting with the idea that we have to completely eradicate our current business, which kind of, is hopefully there for good reason that you've set it out that way. it's a small thing, but like I think we can a little bit be led astray by that vision of the completely disruptive story. There's a lot of non-disruptive stories as well. Clay Christensen, one of the thinker who kind of invented that term, he actually pointed out himself there was an intermediate thing between incremental and disruptive. There's something called radical innovation, and radical innovation is when you're still within your current field. You're not kind of destroying your business, but you're also pushing the needle further than the small tweaks and the target costing type innovation you see there. So I think that's important to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think it's really important, because I think sometimes these little incremental steps are actually, as you say, radical steps when you're a company that's been around for 50 years, 100 years, and you've got billions of dollars coming in every year. You don't want to mess with it too much, but you also want to be able to continue to expand and grow. I think a lot of the times, the conversation when I have with prospective partners around venture creation is, is there an opportunity for us to look in the market to see whether there is an investment opportunity in a startup that's already operating in this space, so you get access to the, to the teams, to the intellectual property, to all the insights that come from that? Are there, partnerships that you can develop with the startup ecosystem? And I think corporate venturing is improving over the years. It's still kind of tough sometimes to match up with a big company. And then also, are there acquisitions that make sense? Can you really acquire and create more value from that acquisition rather than destroying value? Because a lot of times it's hard for big companies to ingest those new startups, right?
Yeah, and I think that's it's a really important perspective to keep in mind. And I think it comes back to risk. Because we have these great examples of somebody who reconfigured a business model and went in and overtook an industry. Amazing, but before, that's kind of after the fact that you're served that story. When you look at it, a business model is such a complex, interdependent thing that if you're just hey, let's put together a new business model, I mean, the odds of that not working, they're tremendously high. So I think that's sometimes missed a little bit in this whole, oh yeah, we'll just put together a new business model for the industry. That's a complex undertaking. It's I mean, I may be biased here because that's the field I've mostly worked in, but I am really a great believer in the idea that sometimes it's not about destroying your industry. Sometimes it is just about figuring out, we have a great company here, we can leverage it, we have strengths that we're probably not using properly, and within our current customer base or people who are kind of fairly close to it, there's probably really interesting stuff we can do. We overlook those stories because they're not quite as glamorous as the Apple beats Nokia story, but there's many more of them, and it's great if you're an investor and you have a very high risk strategy. That's perfect. That's your choice. But if you are working at a little bit of a less risk kind of willing environment, then you are often better off solving simpler problems, if you will, than necessarily the really big game-changing ones.
For sure. I mean, and then you mentioned Nokia, but right, Nokia did a complete pivot from the timber company that they were, from and paper, and and they've had a lot of material for business case studies.
Yeah, it's always interesting to me how, I mean, this is a little bit understandable, but there's a bias in everything in our business conversation. We judge people by the latest thing that happened. So, okay, Nokia eventually ran into a wall. That's true. But did you notice what they did before that? They have an amazing story, which is they were the world's biggest, I don't know, it's insane. And they are now, if you say Nokia, oh, you're a loser. It's kind of I don't remember which movie this is from, but somebody's pointing out kind of, people die. Does that mean they're losers? Einstein was a loser because he eventually died?
Right.
No,
Probably had a big impact in where we got to today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's like that's a slightly more complex story to get across than the easy story of Nokia loser, Apple winner, and so on.
Yes. Yeah. We like to have clear winners and losers when we're talking in sound bites anyway. But over dinner conversations, it can get a bit more interesting. So, I think for me as an entrepreneur and, on the boards of some startups and as an angel investor, I've used a lot of different methodologies to really help determine whether or not we're solving a big enough pain point to create a, minimum viable product around, or to create a whole business around. And, some of the ways that we can, do it is through, throwing up a website, putting some copy on there, doing a test campaign. Maybe you spend a few $100s, maybe you spend a few $1,000s to be able to see whether the copy works, the images, work, whether the pain point you're, trying to solve is something that, consumer engagement. You can determine, what the best pricing is, because you can change, the pricing. What are some of the methodologies that you have found are really good for entrepreneurs to try to really get at, is this a real problem that we should try to at least build an MVP around?
Yeah, well, I mean, in my view, what I'm coming in with is a bit of a missing link in the process. Because when you look at it, the whole kind of lean startup design thinking space has, I feel, been really, really good at sharing these various methods and tools for validating a problem. Like, get out of the building, Steve Blank, like, go test, go prototype, what have we. Great. Yeah. The missing part is actually the thinking part. Like, before you go out of the building, what problem are you gonna try to test out there to look at? And that's where I think reframing has a really big role to play. Like, here's an example I always use. You are the owner of an office building and your tenants are complaining about the speed of the elevator. Now, you can, of course, go in and solve that problem and say, okay, why is the elevator slow? How can we make it faster? Let's do some tests, blah, blah, blah. But in a sense, that might not be the right problem to solve. And the counterexample is, of course, if you speak to any kind of savvy landlord, if they get complaints about slow elevators, they do something very different from making it faster. They go out and they put up a mirror in the hallway, because they know from experience that people go, oh, there's a mirror? Oh, that's beautiful. And then they forget time. So that's a super simple example of the core idea of this notion that I call reframing. I didn't invent it, but like it's a very good term for capturing what this is about. Instead of like, you have the problem, and then you jump into the solution phase. Instead of doing that, when you have the problem, you spend a little bit of time saying, wait, is this actually the right problem to solve? Or is there a different way of looking at this? Instead of asking, why is the elevator slow? You may want to ask, does this problem, well, might this be not about the speed of the elevator at all? Might this be about the rent? Might it be about people being unhappy, or the weight, or whatever it is? So that part of the equation, people aren't as good at it. We're very good at going out, getting out of the building, testing stuff, prototyping, and so on. We're not so good at that actually slightly analytical work of going in and saying, wait a second, let's just spend a little bit of time not digging into this problem, but actually taking a step back and asking, is this the right problem to solve? So I think that's really where my tool fits in. If you're an investor, a startup founder comes in and says, hey, we have this problem. Our sales aren't really as good as we want them to be, so we'd like to spend some more money on marketing. Very tempting conclusion. Yeah, if sales are down, it must be because our marketing is not, like, we haven't invested enough in that. Or is it? Might it be a problem with the functionality? Might it be something we haven't understood about the channels? Might it be, there's an issue with the product or service that is causing this lack of adoption, instead of just blindly saying, oh, this must be a marketing problem, let's put some money into that. Like, super simple, but so impactful when you get that right.
Yeah, I agree completely. It's funny that you use the landlord elevator example, because I think I've been a developer in Detroit and some other urban centers, and
Yeah.
those projects are super tricky because they were buildings that were not intended for the use that that you're not using them typically, and they were derelict for a long time. So you've got to go in and make all sorts of investments that no one actually sees. So generally do not appreciate, but it's a huge investment as a developer, as an entrepreneur. And I remember I had that exact problem. People were complaining about the elevator, and it was funny because I was new to this, kind of work. And I thought, well, if it's broken, it has to be fixed. I must, fix it.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how expensive it is. Like, this was I don't even remember how old the building itself was. Well over 250 years old. And I don't remember when I think it was in the early 1900s or early-ish 1900s when the elevator was put in initially.
Yeah.
And I was trying to retain as much of the character as possible. So I was trying to keep that one in. So I went through the whole, investment and time and, labor to get the elevator fixed. And then I noticed people weren't actually even using the elevator. So they had complained about it. I got it fixed. I made this big investment, and then people weren't actually using it. And so, I had to, and at this time with this particular project, this was right after the Lehman's crisis. And so no banks were financing, these kinds of projects. Just, they were not putting, so everything was coming out of my pocket. And it was also, in Detroit, and I was trying to do a triple bottom line business. So I was trying to keep rents really low. So every investment was a big kind of cost to me. And so after that, I sat down, with all the tenants, and every time we got some kind of request or complaint in, I would, sit down and I'd say, okay, here are all of the improvements that I would love to make today. We can't make all of them today. So let's look through these and let's really talk through what's going on with each one of these problems and figure out what's the biggest problem that, that we need to solve. Yeah. I did little things around the elevator, like put little candies in there, which is not very good because it's not healthy. But then I put these like informational things about using the stairs. And if you hit certain number, steps every day, it helps improve like your cardiovascular system and, lots of different things. But I think it was after me making that investment and realizing, actually, I don't think this was such a big problem because people aren't using the elevator anyway. And all of that money could have gone towards something that was more meaningful in terms of improving, the overall, spaces that they were in. So I think, I think it's nail on the head on that. That one resonates with me on a very personal level.
And it also taps into the fundamental, one of the fundamental principles on decision making. You should always try to generate multiple options. Like there's a researcher at University of Ohio, Paul Nutt, and he looked into good and bad decisions, like what characterizes those. Cardinal rule: if you're only facing one choice, you're probably going to make a worse decision. Like if you're saying, should we invest in this company or not? Right. That has like an error rate of something about half of the time we get that wrong.
Yeah.
Whereas if you get used to this philosophy of saying, should we invest in company A, B, or C, or maybe hold off a bit, you are reducing your error rate to 1 out of 3. And so it's just one of the fundamental things. Try to put multiple options on the board before you make a decision. Anytime you have this or not thing, you should like alarm bells. Should we do this or not? So really, really good approach. It sounds like you're using too.
Yeah, I think that optionality, I think you're right. And I think it allows you to build kind of consensus around decision making too. In some organizations you need that, even when it's just you and a co-founder, right? I think you know, by having that optionality, you can really tease through all of the different considerations or scenarios. And if you're on opposing ends of, you know, which, you know, option to choose, sometimes that other option, as you say, like maybe we should wait another 3 months, see if we get, you know, more information or more insights, and, you know, take a decision then. Yeah, it's nice to have options. Not everyone has them. Sometimes you're in, you know, a fire mode, and you gotta, like, do we use, you know, water or flour to put out that that fire as quickly as possible? It's nice to have them. It's nice when you have them. So when you talk, and you know, and I also in my work talk a lot about reframing problems, what do you really mean when you refer to kind of problem reframing or reframing problems?
Yeah, I mean, I use, at a high level, I talk about a very, very simple process. And it has to be simple because it has to work as part of your daily life. Like, the second you have a tool with 40 questions, forget it, you will never use it, or maybe once a year. I have this, here's the habit, basically. It has 3 steps. First of all, you just state the problem. And that sounds simple, but that's your first guard against not stating the solution. And like, my problem is, how do we make the elevator faster? No, what's the problem? Like, then when you have that, you gather a couple of people, this could be 2 people, and you spend a little bit of time, this can be 10 minutes, on trying to challenge your understanding of the problem. So it's almost like a type of brainstorm, except you're not looking for solutions to it, you're looking for alternative ways of thinking about what might be going on. Is it really about the speed of the elevator? Or is this about them being unhappy? Is it like they hate the super? Is it that they complaining about the rent? What's going on? And then after the end of that, finally, that's step 3, you decide how to move forward. And that's a simple thing, but like, there is a danger, especially if you work with like smart PhD people. You know, you can get into paralysis by analysis. You can sit and endlessly ruminate on the nature of the problem. People know that from their private lives probably too. And that's dangerous. Like, at the end of the day, you have to decide, okay, what are we going to do next? And then at a later point, you can come back and revisit the problem. But you need to keep doing something. You need to keep a momentum in this. I know that's one of the philosophies you use in Prehype, like momentum is oxygen. That's very true. So that's really the high level, kind of, what's the problem? Can we try to reframe the problem, and then figure out how to move forward at the end of it?
Yeah. One of my favorite, you know, parts in our process is really when we get into kind of problem identification, you know, stage, because we'll go in and the partner typically thinks that they have a very, you know, clear problem. And then even if we just stick with that problem statement that they say that they have, you know, during the course of the workshop, you know, the entire room is filled with, you know, tiny little Post-its, and they're just everywhere with different variations of that problem. So even if it's just that one problem statement, you can get thousands of problems emanating from, you know, from that one problem. And then, you know, when we kind of cluster around, you know, specific, you know, Post-its that people have put down, then you see that some of the interpretations of that problem in new problem statements are actually fundamentally different. They're very, very different, you know, problems. So that's, for me, it's one of the most fun parts of working in innovation is, you know, some people you can see, they're like, minds are blown when they look, and they're like, and sometimes it can be overwhelming for some people, but it's like, no, we just need to like put it all out there, and we can kind of put it down. And I think people get really excited when they then get to the stage of like, okay, now we really know what we're dealing with here.
I mean, you're touching upon why I wrote the book, because
good, because I was going to ask that question. So.
I mean, it is. I have like a vision of trying to democratize reframing, and I say that because what I found is there are people who are good at it. You're an example. Like, you have a process for it, and when you take people through that, it works really well. But here's the issue: most people aren't you. Like the vast majority of people out there in the world, they're not, educated in lean startup practices or design thinking or whatever kind of like wherever you picked it up.
Yeah.
And I think that's insane. Like that's because we don't all need to become design thinkers. I think that's a mistake to think that. But there is this very specific skill of getting better at identifying the right problem. We know from 50 years of research it's incredibly powerful. We know actually it's learnable. It's not about just being smart. You can learn this even though you didn't necessarily ace all your education things or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I think it's insane that like I had this experience of I taught this big program. There's a 1-week program we ran in a big tech company in the US. And they had gathered the top 2% of their leaders, like from globally from within the company. So really smart people, Fortune 500. And I taught a 2-hour session on reframing. And at the end of the week, when we asked what was most impactful for you, that was it. That was their answer. Now, that's great news for me as when I give talks. But it's insane. Like here are some really smart people, top 2% of the company working in a Fortune 500 company, and they didn't know how to do this. Like that's wrong. This is stuff we need to learn at entry level. This is stuff we should be teaching at universities. Like getting the right problem. Like imagine if we could make people just 10% better at that. The amount of time and energy we would stop wasting on kind of running down the wrong garden path. That was the more impassioned version of why I wrote the book. I think we need to democratize this ability, and that's why I wrote it.
No, I love that because I think you're absolutely right, and I think if we can even start it when kids are younger, then I think we're giving them a really amazing toolkit to approach life, not just work and creating new businesses, products, and services, but a lot of times looking at situations and determining, okay, what really is the problem that you're facing, and a lot of times helping them get to gratitude for the problem itself. For having the problem. So helping to change mindset around this problem I'm having that I was just complaining to my parents about is actually an opportunity, and it's an opportunity to do X, or it's an opportunity to learn X, or I think if we can not just teach all these people who are really well educated and highly successful in so many different areas of life, but we can take it back and really start to teach kids. There you go. That's your next book. It's a kid's book.
I have actually considered this.
Really? Yeah.
Well, there's a story. Stacy Seltzer, who works in Prehype.
My partner.
Well, Stacy and his wife Kate, they also run this elementary prep school in upstate New York called the Hudson Lab.
Yes, and they're doing phenomenally well because they set up this whole new pod system.
Oh yeah. And actually, Kate's just been interviewed for the New York Times, where she talks about the importance of framing problems correctly with parents. So very key. But I'm mentioning them because a couple of years ago, when they had I think it was their second cohort, Stacey and Kate actually invited me up to teach reframing to the kids. So
that's cool. I didn't know that.
No, I have this workshop I teach on it. And as part of that, the participants apply reframing on some of their current problems. Like they literally pick a problem right here, right now that they're facing, and then they try to reframe them in teams. Now, I asked the kids to do the same thing. And this is fascinating. Like when you look at 5, 6, and 7-year-old kids, if you ask adults what type of problems they have, or what came up, most adults will go, well, bedtime, or the iPad, or I have to go to school and I don't like it, or whatever. None of those came up. None of those came up because they are parents' problems. Like if I'm a parent and my kid doesn't want to go to bed, well, then I think that like that's my biggest problem with my kids. So that's probably their biggest problem too.
Yes.
In reality, almost all of the kids, they focus on something with their friends or their sisters and brothers.
Yeah.
Like those were the problems that were big in kids' mind. And
Yeah.
I find that fascinating. Like we've all been kids, we've all been that age. And yet when we try to imagine what their biggest problem is, we often get it wrong. So there's an extension here into not just understanding your own problems, but understanding the problems of customers or people in your life. And in taking reframing and problem solving into, problems aren't only in our professional lives, they are as much in our personal lives, and they can make a difference there too. So it is really like a skill set that can make a tremendous difference once you get the hang of it.
Well, when I first got my copy, which I was very excited to get, and I was also very excited that I got my
Yay!
There we go.
Right?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, my signed copy. I was very excited, so thank you for that. But I think getting an endorsement from Eric Schmidt, I think, is not something to look away from. And he says, if you want the superpower of solving better problems, read this book. And that is very precise language, because he doesn't say, if you want the superpower of solving better business problems, read this book. He says better problems, right? And so would you say that like the different exercises that are kind of in here, and see there are some right there, some good frameworks, are good for just about anyone? Anyone should read the book? Or do you think that there's a particular, reader that will benefit most from the book?
There is. I mean, at a base level, I wrote this for a very wide audience. So you'll actually find in the book, it's a mix of lots of business stories from the companies I work with, but also a couple of personal stories to kind of like around careers, around trouble with a partner or whatever. Because it's really this key skill that, again, it spans business and personal. I'd say there are people who benefit more from it, and those are the ones that deal with a lot of new problems on a regular basis. Like, so, there are certain problems that we kind of know how to solve, and it's more just routine of doing it. And that's great. Like, reframing is less needed there. But anybody who works in a fast-paced environment, if you work with a startup, you are almost per definition doing something new. And in that context, reframing tends to be even more important. And ultimately, of course, anybody who professionally solves problems for a living. And I mean here, consultants, lawyers, arguably investors as well in relation to the founders and so on. I think that's where it really becomes a key skill, because that's, if you are a management consultant, you make a living off of dealing with really tricky problems. And it is key, as any management consultant will tell you, it is key to challenge the understanding of the problem instead of just buying into whatever the client says the problem is, or if it's a founder or whoever you're dealing with. So that's probably the immediate answer to it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think, the timing of the book is very fortuitous, because I think there are lots of small business owners and massive global corporations that right now have had to figure out, hey, this pandemic is a problem. That's a very macro problem. So how do we pivot, or how do we, become more agile in the way that we, manage through these unique times where there aren't precedents, right? There aren't too many examples of how to respond to these different situations. So looking at, okay, what's the real problem? Not just like hanging it up on, okay, we're having a pandemic. Business doesn't stop. You have to survive, right? So identifying what is the real pain point for your customers, and as much as possible, adapting your business to be able to accommodate those customers in new ways. So I think the timing of the book is really great, because there are a lot of business leaders, both small business and big corporates, that are trying to figure this out.
Yeah, it is it was launched during the outbreak of COVID, right? And I'll be honest, I was kind of nervous because I thought, oh, what does that mean for a book getting out there does that get lost? And luckily, that hasn't turned out to be the case. It's selling incredibly well, and it's kind of going. I think it's now going to translate into 8 different languages so far, to China, to Russia, Brazil, kind of. It's getting out there, so that evidently makes me very happy, because that's the whole point. Trying to kind of. I have the modest mission of trying to upgrade the world's ability to solve problems. So
yes,
I know, yeah.
Well, we need more of that. So, so I appreciate it for one, and I want to thank you because you've offered a free download for one chapter, so that people can get a taste of the book and try out some of the methodologies. And then they should also look at Amazon to buy the full book. Yep.
Yeah, it's on whatever platform you use to buy books. It'll be there somewhere.
Okay. Yep. And hopefully one of our local bookstores open, so we're still going in there almost every week. And Barnes & Noble is open now, so I think we got to support our local bookshops as much as possible, but so it's great. So we can get it just about anywhere in 8 different languages now.
Yeah. Well, they're coming out. I think the Danish one is coming out. That's why I'm in Denmark right now, to support the launch of the Danish edition. So they're kind of coming out. I just saw the Brazilian cover. Kind of like it's fun to see your book in a language you don't speak.
For sure. And since travel is restricted, I'm assuming you're not doing a kind of book tour per se. So
no, that's gone virtual. And I already gave, especially the workshop, I give that virtually as well. So that was actually a fairly easy transition for me. And of course, there are some trips that dropped out of the calendar, like a trip to Japan is always fun. But some of the other trips that dropped out of the calendar was like to an airport hotel in Houston. And you're kind of like, not too sad. There's nothing wrong with Houston. I love Houston. I've been multiple times. And yet, like, the airport hotel is not the most inspiring location you can visit. It's I've been doing a fair deal of online, and to my surprise, that actually works really, really well. Once you get the tweaks right, and I'm sure a lot of people have experienced this, that there are some tremendous benefits to it that you don't necessarily get in person. And of course, you can reach a lot more people that way.
For sure. And so you're continuing to do workshops, and people should go to your website if they want to find out more about the workshops you're doing?
Yeah, that's there's a site, thomaswedell.com, that's about me. There's one that's not mentioned here, but you can find the link to as well, which is just howtoreframe.com, which is about the method. It's also linked on the site. So thomaswedell.com will kind of get you there.
Okay, great. Well, I have loads of other questions, but in the spirit of, allowing you to enjoy your time in Denmark, I think we'll call it to a close from now. And hopefully in the future, maybe we can dive deeper into some of those specific themes within the book and about venture creation and problem solving more generally. And then, that phrase people say, oh yeah, we solved all the world's problems in our conversation. Well, maybe one of ours will attempt to do that.
I hope so. And that'll be great. Thank you, Angel.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas.